Hello, so I told you before that the operator guns were a bit of a mismatch. Well, they've gone through in a patch and done some balance changes to the operator guns. First one we're going to look at is this, the RO933, and this is its previous stats. Now what they've said is they've reduced its damage and reduced its recoil. In the loadout screen we can check out the little blue bars for the damage. Comparing it to the G36C, which we know still has 24 damage, the RO is doing a lot less. It looks like it's doing 20 damage. And the M16A3 is now doing the same damage as the carbines, 24. When I first tested out these guns, I went to this fence here and shot at the side of this van. So that is my test bed, and this is the original firing of the RO933 in full auto. It's pretty horrible. And it wasn't much better in burst fire, to be honest, because the first shot recoil was pretty bad as well. So what I'm doing for these tests is going back to this same place and doing the same firing tests again, and then I can compare what the side of the van looks like from the first time to the second time. Second time round, the RO933 has got considerably less recoil. Its recoil seems to be fairly similar to what the M16 was before the patches. I haven't got any stats to go on, all I can count is the number of bullets that are hitting the side of the van and how the gun feels. So as you can see, that pattern is a lot better than its previous pattern. There's a lot more bullets hitting the side of the van. It's averaging around 19 or 20 bullets, which is about what the M16A3 did, and it's a bit worse than the old M416. Its burst fire has improved as well, so it looks like the first shot multiplier has been reduced in line with its recoil reduction. I'm guessing it's probably come down to say 2.5 instead of 3, because there is still quite a big jump in that first shot. Move forward and have a look, you'll see it's still not great for burst firing, but it's a lot better than it was. If we do a side-by-side comparison with the old version on the left and the new version on the right, you can see that the right hand group is a lot tighter, it's getting more shots on the side of the van, and it's the same for the burst fire as well. The group's shorter and narrower. So the gun is a lot better in terms of its recoil, but if I'm reading those damage bars right and the damage is 20, then that's all this gun is going to have going for it. It's recoil, because its damage output is going to be bad. Now I'm going to move on to the M16A3. This used to do 28 damage and it had a good recoil model. Now they've decreased its damage down to 24 and they've increased its recoil. So pre-patch, this gun performed pretty similarly to what the RO933 does now. It got a very good recoil pattern which was pretty much straight up, and it was getting plenty of shots onto the van. When it came to burst firing, it wasn't quite as good as the M416, but it was very good. And again, it's a very similar pattern to what we get now on the RO933. But let's see how it performs now that the patch is in place. And what we find is pretty disappointing, because what we've got is a reversal. The M16A3 is now shooting like the old RO933. So before the patch, the M16A3 used to get 20 rounds onto the side of this van. Post patch, it's only managing 13 rounds. So if I've got my maths right, the recoil of the M16A3 is now 0.5 from 0.34. And it would seem that its burst fire recoil has gone up by a similar amount. If we look at this pattern now, it's pretty awful, and the burst fire is considerably worse. Look at the gap between the first shots and the second and third shots. So for the M16A3, they've reduced its damage output, they've increased its recoil, and they've made it terrible at burst firing. It's almost as if they don't want you to aim with assault rifles in this game. The final gun for this patch comparison is the M416 or the M416. So this gun pre-patch was pretty similar to the M16A3, and this gun has now moved over to the criminals loadout, not the cops. The differentiation between the old M16A3 and the old M416 was that the M416 wasn't as good at full auto fire because it had a considerable recoil to the right. However, what the M416 did have going for it was its burst fire, It had slightly lower vertical recoil and slightly lower first shot modifier, so its burst fire was slightly more accurate than the M16A3's. As we can see here, it's a very good burst fire gun and it's an okay full auto gun. But when we take the post-patch M416 to the side of the van, well, it's a very different story. Again, like the M16A3, its vertical recoil has been massively increased. I still think it's slightly lower than the M16A3's, but only very slightly, because the M416 is getting 14 shots on average onto the side of the van now. And it's a similar story for its burst fire. I think its first shot multiplier has also had an increase, but it still might be fractionally lower than the M16A3's. But when we move up close to get a good look, you'll see there's a distinct gap between the first shot and the second and third shots, and it's a lot worse than it was pre-patch. So what conclusions can we draw from these changes? Either Visceral do not know how to balance a first-person shooter, or these changes are extreme testing to see what would happen if they did this to a gun. The RO, bizarrely, is now the mid-range gun, but it's got such a poor damage model that it's going to be taken apart by battle rifles, semi-auto snipers and full snipers. And the M16A3 and the M416 are now pretty much close-up weapons, and because of their rate of fire, they're still going to be some of the best close-in weapons behind the shotguns. The Enforcer could end up being the best close-range option with the shotguns and the best mid-range option with the battle rifles. Now, I haven't been able to test this out as much as I'd like because I've popped my shoulder again, so at the moment I'm pretty much one-handed, so my playtime is limited, and that's why this video is a bit basic in the editing. It's usually fine within a few days, so the videos might be a bit slower this week and a bit more basic, but other than that, things should be fine. Anyway, thanks for watching.